All rise.
Please be seated. The Supreme Court of Texas convenes in ceremonial session this afternoon to receive a portrait of our former colleague, Justice Scott Brister. We welcome all of you to these celebratory proceedings. Former justices' portraits hang here in the courtroom, down the hallway outside in the Tom Clark building, and across the street in the old Supreme Court courtroom on the third floor of the Capitol. One portrait I always point out to visitors in the entryway, in the alcove in that direction, is of the all-woman court in the 1925 case of Johnson versus Darr, consisting of Hortense Ward, Hattie Hennenberg, and Ruth Brazil. They served as justices of this court years before Texas law would permit them to serve as jurors. The portrait, though done many years later, is quite a good reflection of how the court must have appeared at the time. I hope you will take this opportunity to take in some of our portrait collection. The stories of many of the court's members are told in a book commissioned by the Texas Supreme Court Historical Society and written by noted author James Haley, which you should get and read. Several special guests have joined us this afternoon, and I would put the peril of introducing them on the senior justice, but he escaped this afternoon. It's funny what terror can do to you. Actually, his mother is ill in San Antonio, and we miss him and Justice Guzman. But we have a number of guests that I will attempt to introduce from the judiciary. First, my predecessor, Wallace Jefferson, and his predecessor, Tom Phillips. Then we have wives, which I must be sure we get to. Nubia Devine is here, seated beside Carla Johnson, and Greg Lehrman is there. We have two members of our sister court, the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, Jerry Smith and his wife, Mary Jane, and Priscilla Owen, formerly a judge of this court. Then it gets harder. We have Justice Enoch, formerly of this court, Justice Dale Wainwright, formerly of this court. We have Jim Stanton, former district judge in Dallas County, I believe. Brett Busby from the Court of Appeals in Harris County. David Keltner, formerly of the Court of Appeals in Fort Worth. Jane Bland, from whom we'll hear before too long. And Harvey Brown, also of the Court of Appeals in Houston. Who did I overlook? Nobody wants to call it to my attention. Oh, thank you, Judge, for being here. Yep. And anybody else? Well, I'll report to Paul I did a good job. It is our custom to mark a portrait presentation by dedicatory remarks. Here today to present those remarks is the Honorable Jane Bland, Justice of the Court of Appeals for the First District of Texas in Houston. Justice Bland was appointed to that court in 2003 and to the district court in 1997. She is a recipient of the William H. Rehnquist Award given annually by the National Center for State Courts and presented by the Chief Justice of the United States to a state judge who exemplifies the highest level of judicial excellence, integrity, fairness, and professional ethics, and Jane Bland fits that to a T. And more importantly, she served by designation on this court in one case in 2006 and authored the court's opinion. And so, Justice Bland, welcome back.
right. May it please the court. First off, on behalf of the Houston judges, thank you to all the members of the court for your quick action last week. Your orders helped lawyers have some breathing room whose homes or law practices are flooded. And more importantly, you helped enlist a whole cadre of volunteer lawyers who are hard at work in Houston helping people in need from out of state. And that happened through the court's order. And it's been remarkable what people have accomplished in the last week in Houston. And so we're very grateful to the court for helping us in Houston. But we're here to celebrate a joyful occasion. Today we dedicate Scott Brister's portrait. Justice Brister served with distinction on this court from 2003 to 2009. And what should a portrait of Scott Brister convey upon seeing it decades from now? First, it should convey the sense that he is a scholar and an experienced judge. He's an honors graduate of Duke and Harvard Law. His high school English teacher, Sharon Mansfield, once described him as pure brilliance. Although his colleague on the court, Priscilla Owen, was Miss Mansfield's clear favorite. He's board certified in 3 specialty areas and is the author of numerous law review articles, including an editorial with Senator Ted Cruz entitled, "The 10th Amendment is Needed Because Men Aren't Angels." Some would say they should know. Scott would know, because one of his scholarly interests is what makes for good and bad decisions. And he teaches the bench and bar about the advantages and pitfalls of analytical shortcuts like the wisdom of crowds and cognitive anchoring. He began as a trial judge in the busy Harris County District Courts, appointed in 1989 by Governor Bill Clements. And as we all know, Governor Clements made some very good and long-lasting judicial appointments. In the trial courts, Justice Brister learned firsthand what worked well and what did not. About a decade later, he was elected to the First Court of Appeals and soon thereafter appointed as Chief Judge of the 14th Court of Appeals. Throughout his years in these courts, he developed a reputation for hard work and for a thoughtful approach to resolving legal disputes. So he brought this breadth of experience with him to the court and used it wisely in all of his opinions. The most cited among them is the City of Keller against Wilson, a case in which he deftly explains long-standing principles of legal sufficiency. The Keller case is Justice Brister's complementary bookend to the Burke royalty case, decided by the court when Brister was a law clerk for Chief Justice Joe Greenhill in 1981. In the Keller case, Justice Brister quotes from Judge Greenhill's opinion, both to illustrate the proper application of legal sufficiency standards and as a fitting tribute to his mentor. Second, his portrait should have a bit of a look of a reformer. Justice Brister has strong opinions about how judges should solve legal problems. He advocated for ways to streamline trials, to reduce costs to the litigants and the taxpayers, and to resolve cases without delay. At times, he expressed unpopular views and introduced bold solutions to an institution that is not easily turned from its charted course. Faced with a substantial shortfall in the state budget while he was at the Court of Appeals, then Chief Justice Brister wrote in the Houston Chronicle, "I have a suggested cut, my job." He did not think that political anachronism should demand 2 chief justices in Houston and 2 sets of court operations when every part of state government was tightening its belt. With Brister's breathtaking number of ideas for improvement and an eagerness to enter the fray, Chief Justice Jefferson often aptly described Justice Brister as a force of nature. And with his disarming smile, Scott Brister was always the first to recognize that such forces are not easily managed. Whether adopted or not, it was Justice Brister's ideas that encouraged the conversation and moved this institution toward solutions. Third, this portrait should say, "Here is a wise judge, devoted to the rule of law." Justice Brister ruled with a grounded faithfulness to the law, regardless of a party's position or influence. In the Reliance Steel case, he wrote, "Neither poverty nor wealth can help a jury decide whose negligence caused an accident." And in upholding a claim brought by a wrongfully convicted man, he recognized how little monetary awards can do in the face of the deprivation of liberty. He strived to explain legal rules in simple, non-legal ways, like that one party hesitates to call the other a liar does not prevent jurors from doing so. And in a dissent in which he questioned whether his colleagues on the court had experienced river tubing, he wrote, "Nature is not safe. In many instances, that is its beauty. We can make a river safer by removing every rock and posting warning signs every 50 feet, but then it's no longer a river, it's a water park." The people of Texas face a choice with respect to wild lands. We can leave them like they are and trust visitors to use reasonable caution, or we can flatten them and fill them with signs for the safety of those few who might not. His opinions about Texas procedure reflected this practical bent. He simplified jurisdictional challenges to address them the same way, no matter the vehicle used to raise them. He's fond of aphorisms and equated burdensome procedural pleas with white elephants, which he helpfully explained came from the story of the kings of Siam who gifted white elephants to their enemies, knowing the ruinous cost of their upkeep. He also understood that cases with serious legal errors are flaws in the fabric of the law. When he feared that a diplomatic touch with an errant court of appeals left room for debate, he would sum it up plainly, writing, "I join the court's opinion, but I would be clearer. Rather than expressing serious reservations about this unusual procedure, I would say, don't do it." Justice Brister's opinions championed democracy and a government accountable directly to the people. He delivered the court's opinions in a series of cases, ensuring that ensuring that people would not be removed from the ballot for technical curable defects. He noted the ballot is not restricted to those who never make a mistake. Thank goodness. He understood that part of this accountability meant a principled and consistent approach to jury selection, the closest that many people ever come to the third branch of government. And so during his tenure, the court delivered a series of opinions clarifying jury selection in civil cases. He understood the travails of everyday life, prompting him to remark in one opinion, "I doubt using a broom to fetch merchandise is OSHA approved." But the question was whether persons of ordinary prudence, like ourselves, our spouses, or our teenage children, would ever do something very much like it. Reasonable jurors are not required to find someone negligent every time there is an accident. And this was not the only insight he gained from his family. A few weeks ago, a Wall Street Journal art critic described why John Singer Sargent's The Daughters of Edward Darley Bolt is considered a masterpiece. The work, which hangs in the Boston Museum of Art, portrays Mr. Bolt's 4 daughters. It upended conventions of portraiture by giving each figure room to breathe, and it illuminates for the viewer a fleeting sense of their world. It's a reflection of the magic of 4 daughters. Scott placed his deep faith, his wife Julie, and their 4 daughters, above professional ambition, foregoing politicking and glad-handing whenever he could, and often bringing them along if he could do that. And this aspect of Scott both lightened and enlightened his judicial temperament and made him a better judge. Finally, his portrait is a measure of the depth of Justice Brister's friendships among the bar and in the judiciary. One of the delights and challenges of appellate judging is its deliberative rigor. No judge can go it alone, and our decisions can at times be close and tough to make. Scott was unstinting in sharing his ideas for improving the work of other judges. Even when he was not assigned author, the language and analysis of an opinion benefited from his work on it. His generosity in sharing his work with his colleagues was endearing, especially at those times when his pure stubbornness was less so. The week that Justice Brister announced his departure from the court, Justice Antonin Scalia had publicly lamented that the United States was devoting too many of its best minds to the enterprise of lawyering. Lawyers, he noted, don't produce anything or put food on the table. But economists will tell you that one common element of the places where human productivity has been its most remarkable is that of an independent judiciary and the rule of law. We don't need lots of our best minds to keep democracy afloat, but even Justice Scalia would not have begrudged us the rare few that we have like Scott. And so we dedicate a portrait of a man who has one of the best minds in the country, who coupled it with the work ethic of the Puritans, and who always knew how blessed he was to dwell for a time in this court. Justice Brister, your portrait represents your time in this space. We appreciate it as a slice of your heritage and ours. We are grateful for the work and service that it represents, and we look forward to many, many more years of collegial fellowship with you.
Thank you, Justice Bland. I now call upon Justice Brister to respond.
Well, I feel like I'll ruin the moment if I say anything. Thank you so much. Jane was one of the few judges willing to take the risk of having me swear her into office when she became an appellate judge. I'm glad it stuck, and I'm glad for her to be here today. Thank you for those remarks. And thank you for the quotes. You know, sometimes you spend a lot of time, those of you that are appellate judges especially, crafting an opinion. You have what you think is a flash of brilliance, a way to say thing catchy, and then nobody ever reads it. Nobody ever finds it, you know, once in 10 years or somebody, I read that, boy, that came in handy. Well, that makes it all worth it. I want to thank all of you for coming today. This celebration of the court and its history, you honor the court by your attendance. You're also doing me a big favor. It would have been very embarrassing if nobody showed up, so I appreciate that. I want to introduce just a few family members that are here with me today. First, of course, my faithful and patient wife of 30 years and my best friend, Julie Brister. Row, my similarly patient and supportive mother of 62 years, Annette Brister of Waco. And Dr. Susan Brister, the sister and pediatrician who made innumerable house calls for us, for our 4 daughters for many years. Sorry, my 4 daughters couldn't be here today. They are a huge part of our lives as a family, but they are literally scattered across all 4 corners of the country, and we used up all our Rapid Rewards miles last week at a niece's wedding in Atlanta. But I promised to make them come by and see their daddy's portrait as soon as in the near future. I also want to introduce my artist, Patsy Strode from Canyon Lake. Patsy, would you stand? As you'll see, as you can see, she did a great job considering what she had to work with. And my wife discovered Patsy's work through paintings of Texas landscapes, and we're delighted that she agreed to try her hand at Texas judges. To be honest, it's a little embarrassing inviting people to come see a picture of yourself, especially people that see you all the time and already know what you look like. Like most of the people on the walls around us, I come from a family that didn't make portraits for posterity. Most of my forebears were school teachers or farmers. Not one was a lawyer. In fact, that's partly how I got here, because the only lawyers I knew during law school were Priscilla Owen and Andy Hainan, who are friends from Richville High School. Since they both were working at Andrews Kurth, that's where I ended up working as well. And Andrews Kurth, in turn, played a large role in how I became a judge, not just through the legal experience I gained and the support of the firm in many of my ventures, but perhaps not coincidentally, because the firm was a major contributor to the campaign of one of our business clients, Governor Bill Clements, though I'm sure it was my merits that caused me to be appointed. It was Andy Hainan who convinced me to clerk for Chief Justice Joe Greenhill. Andy had clerked for the judge 2 years before I did. Judge Greenhill was an inspiration, of course, a legal legend, and swore me into office twice, for my first inauguration on the trial court in 1989 and my last on this court in 2003. I learned a lot from him and the other members of this court as a briefing attorney, especially sitting in court conferences, which is one of the few, if not the only court where you can do that. Like many briefing attorneys, past and future, by the end of that year, I finished thinking, you know, it might be fun to sit in one of those big chairs up there behind me. 22 years later, I got that chance. By the grace of God and the appointment of Governor Rick Perry, I got the chance, and one of those chairs, for an all too brief 6 years, was mine. But a word to the current law clerks, as I think Tom Phillips and Jeff Brown would confirm, both also former briefing attorneys and later justices. It turns out the job involves a lot more work and less glory than it looks like to a law clerk. In discussing what I wanted in the portrait with Patsy, I asked her to include two things. One, to make this courtroom the setting, which I think apparently has not been done before, and include one of those chairs. And second, to include a corner of Judge Greenhill's portrait. It's not identified as such on the portrait, but those of you who are here, you're now insiders and you'll be in the know that that's intended to be a corner of his portrait, and he's still looking over my shoulder. As I look around the courtroom today, I see many other people who I'd like to include. Wallace Jefferson, who, when he dissented to one of my opinions, seemed like he always won. Harriet O'Neill, who's not here today, but who was my next seatmate on conferences and bench arguments for many years, and with whom I shared many private comments about what was going on. Dale Wainwright, who preceded me or followed me at several courts and at least one law firm, and who is head of the Historical Society, oversaw and helped organize today's event. Many of the judges from the trial and appellate courts, especially those in Houston, who were my colleagues and became my friends. Staff at the courts where I served, who worked just as hard for less pay and less recognition. My partners and colleagues at Andrews Kurth Kenyon, without whom I never could have put 4 daughters through private colleges, and not to mention the many years of grad school ahead of me. They're going to grad school, I'm paying for it. Mary Jane Smith, my energetic and tireless campaign consultant, who I was able to convince to come out of retirement to help make this event happen. And you, the lawyers and bench, lawyers, fellow members of the bench in the state of Texas, who taught me so much about so many areas of the law I didn't know anything about. Even if, in the case of the lawyers, it sometimes meant handing me at the last minute the key cases that weren't cited in their briefs and motions. But including, of course, all those symbolic references to all those people would make this into one of those kind of Hieronymus Bosch pictures where there's all these little people all over the place doing different things, and the Historical Society doesn't allow that. So instead, all I can give you is my heartfelt thanks for the influence, effect, help, support, friendship throughout my life. As I've said before, the story of my life is like the movie It's a Wonderful Life in reverse. Not what Bedford Falls would have looked like without me, but how different my life would have been without so many of you. So may God bless each of you, and may God bless the state of Texas and this honorable court. Thank you.
In my introductions, I think I may have overlooked Jason Boatwright, one of our newest judges on the appellate court. And I did overlook Andrew Weber, the former clerk of this court, and Doug Bland, who's here with Justice Bland. Thank you for being here. The portraits that line these walls bear silent witness to our predecessors' service to this court and to the people of Texas. And they're reminders to us and our successors of the legacy in law these men and women have left to our care. Visitors invariably ask, who are all these people? I once knew most of them only by reputation. And now that I've been here a little while, and many portraits have been added, most are colleagues and friends. As the years pass, the problem is you know more, but it's harder to remember it. These portraits remind us that the court is not merely an institution, a marble bench, 9 chairs, in a solemn setting, but that it has faces, many different faces, that it is the work of men and women who have sworn themselves to uphold the law, to guide its development for a short time, and then pass on the stewardship of it to others. Sometimes as I sit here, I feel the gaze of these justices on us. It usually happens during an argument that is not so interesting. Chief Justices John Hickman above me, Robert Calvert on my right, Joe Greenhill on my left, all clerk for Chief Justice, Joe Greenhill clerk for Chief Justice John Alexander down at the end of the bench, and was the first law clerk to serve as a member of the court. His law clerk, Scott Brister, was the third, and Justice Brown, the fourth law clerk to join the court, is over here in what we call Law Clerks Row, in direct view of Chief Justice John Hill. And meanwhile, Chief Justice Jack Pope, who passed away this spring at only 103 years of age, is keeping tabs on Justice Devine and Justice Lehrman. And then, of course, Justice Baker at the end of the bench is looking over here at me as if he wishes he could reach over and edit what I'm writing, which is what he always wanted to do when he was here. Some portraits are of our former colleagues who continue to serve in other arenas. John Cornyn in the United States Senate, Priscilla Owen and Tom Reevely on the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, Will Garwood, Judge Owen's predecessor on the circuit, and his father was my predecessor on this court, Xavier Rodriguez in the back on the United States District Court for the Western District of Texas, and Mike Schneider over here on the right, on my right, also in the Federal District Court in East Texas, and Raul Gonzalez, retired mostly from practice, but comes around from time to time, all friends of this court, and all reminders. While there's no appeal from our decisions on Texas law, they are subject to the verdict of history. We answer not only to our former colleagues' precedents, but to their even more enduring spirit. Encompassed by so great a cloud of witnesses, we are encouraged to lay aside every hindrance and distraction and run with patience our own course as they ran and are running theirs. These portraits are also a metaphor of our work in this room. A portrait does not replicate a person's features, as does a photograph taken with the unforgiving camera. Rather, a portrait is the artist's interpretation of the person. A good portrait is faithful to the subject's appearance, but also reveals some of the inner character, not only of the subject, but also of the artist painting it, and even of the viewer who sees it. Our opinions are portraits in words. We interpret the law before us, faithfully we hope, but also illuminating its meaning in new contexts, drawing out its latent features, its essence. We know that when we have done our best, others will in turn interpret our opinions, cited back to us. Our precedent, our word portraiture is sometimes recognizable, sometimes distorted, and we try harder. The artist's work in producing the portrait given to the court today is not unlike our own. And in that spirit, the Supreme Court of Texas gratefully accepts the gift of Justice Scott Brister's portrait. Scott loved the court's work, as he has recounted and as Justice Bland has recounted. He loved it as a law clerk and he loved it as a justice. He left his mark on us. When we would go around the table and Justice Brister would listen patiently to his colleagues state their positions, he would begin, well, that just can't be right. I often agreed with him, but from there he would go on to argue his positions. And then others would borrow it, looking over at him when he would express his views, saying, Justice Brister, that just can't be right. In the almost 6 years he sat on this court, Justice Brister authored dozens of opinions, and because he was not usually one to sit quietly by, a large number of separate opinions. Justice Bland, thank you for your good words, and to family, law clerks, and friends who have gathered, we are grateful for your presence, not only to honor Justice Brister, but in tribute as well to this court to which he has given such devotion. The support you gave him had made his service here possible and pleasant. Inscribed on the front of this bench are the Latin words, Sic et patribus, sit Deus nobis, the title to Ralph Waldo Emerson's 1773 poem celebrating the city of Boston. The Latin is translated, as God has been with our fathers, so may he be also with us. 2 lines from the poem are more familiar than its title. Emerson wrote, "For what avail the plow or sail, or land or life, if freedom fail? We are determined that the freedom assured by the rule of law not fail. For 172 years, the law of this state has been entrusted to men and women like the justices whose portraits surround us. The people of Texas and generations to come are the beneficiaries of their service." Justice Brister, the court gratefully accepts the beautiful portrait. For my colleagues, I extend to you our admiration and good wishes and the gratitude of the Supreme Court and the people of Texas. Thanks everyone for coming. These proceedings are concluded and the clerk will adjourn the court.
All rise. Oh yay, oh yay, oh yay. The Honorable, the Supreme Court of Texas now stands adjourned. Thank you.